podcast where we talk about bodies, shame, food confidence, and all the nonsense people attach to how we look. I'm Darren Harriott, and today I'm joined by comedian and writer Dave Chawner. Dave's one of those guests who makes perfect sense for this show because he can talk about body image, eating disorders, shame, and masculinity in a way that's funny, honest, and properly human. Because men are still weirdly bad at admitting we've got body stuff. We'll rename it, bury it, joke about it, turn it into health or discipline, anything but actually say what is going on. So that's what we're doing today. We're talking about control, silence, self-worth, and the performance of looking absolutely fine when you're anything but. Dave, mate, it's great to have you here.
What an introduction. I'm blushing. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thank you for doing it. Can I say, when we realized we were going to have you on this podcast, I went and watched your TED Talk that you did from about, how many years ago? 13, 14 years ago?
Like an unbelievably long time, and I'm just a different person, and oh god, it's so cringe, it's so awkward. Oh mate, why would you bring that up? There's so much about that. Talking about shame, oh my god, there's shame in that.
What I liked about it was you could tell that obviously you were a much newer comic, and I could see that you were trying to balance out the seriousness of the topic. You were talking about your own eating disorder and how you were anorexic, but you also wanted it to be a fun experience for people. You still wanted to be funny and engaging and nice. And I could see all of that in your performance as you were doing. And I mean, let's be honest, back when you did a TED Talk, that was back when TED Talk was at its peak. So you must have been really like shitting your pants.
Yeah, it was weird. I mean, I suppose, that was a fun thing to do. And I love TED Talks. I was one of those real bores that used to watch loads of them. So it was incredible to do. It was that sort of thing though, that people weren't there for comedy. So, and the guy that introduced me before hadn't kind of paved the way for like, oh, by the way, if you want to laugh, please laugh. That'll make this a nicer situation. So I just followed, I think it was a talk, because I didn't realize they filmed them all in like one big day. And someone had talked about the massacre in Vietnam that had killed more people per capita. And they're like, oh, this funny guy, come on then, you fat. And it was just, it was so awkward.
Well, let's talk about, some of the topics that you mentioned in there. You talked about your struggles with anorexia. Now, what I wanted to ask you was, your childhood, like your teenage years, was there any issues then? Or when did you realize that, men have issues with their bodies, but I guess they just never talk about it?
I mean, what a question. I think to answer the first one, I think I started to realize that I had a problem gradually. I think this is the problem with mental illness. You treat it like it's something that you have or you don't. And I think actually for me, it was a kind of dawning realization, kind of like if ever you've had a problem with your eyesight, it takes a couple of times. And there are obviously those individual moments where you're like, oh yeah, that's not right. Or other people do this and I don't, or whatever. I think there were kind of catalysts, like I had to appear topless in a play, and I'd always been kind of which is, now that I say it, it's like a weird thing, isn't it? But I had to sort of think about my body then, and you know what, I'd never weirdly, maybe I'm stupid, I never really thought about my gender in respect to body image that much particularly, and I suppose that might be a weird thing in and of itself. But I think I heard anorexia, and I heard it on the BBC, I heard it on the news, but it was something that affected other people. It didn't affect someone like me, kind of in the same way, without being too reductive. But you hear about things like hepatitis. You're like, well, that's an extreme thing. That's never going to happen to me. And you're like, oh, it actually can. It's just a weird sort of thing that kind of felt like it was all caught up in celebrity culture. I didn't realize it just affected normal people.
When when you heard and you became aware of the word anorexia, were you going through it then, or was it just something that you had heard about and then sort of later on?
I think I heard it because people accused me of it quite a lot. I
Uh,
remember my mom crying and screaming at me saying like, "You're anorexic." And I remember one of my mates taking me aside and going, "Mate, you're like anorexic." And that just kind of felt quite extreme to describe what I was going through, because I think a lot of the time, especially with eating disorders, they become your normality, man. So like it's not really extreme. It's not Hollyoaks or Coronation Street. You're just ticking along. It's just something that you do, or something that you don't do. You're just busy cracking on with your day-to-day life.
yeah, I mean, I've spoken to lots of people on this podcast about various types of eating disorders and my own issues. I wonder if you went through this, where you almost don't realize it's a problem because you're
Mm.
just so used to it. It's just a part of your life. This is what I do. I restrict eating, or I overeat on purpose till I'm sick. I don't Is that really that much of an issue? I'm fine. I just know how to do let it out, if you will, when I need to, and then carry on living my life relatively normal. I think when I had my issues, I never realized it was like a bad thing. It was just something that was one of my quirks, if you will.
It's a great explanation, and I think it's very similar to kind of the attitude that we had towards alcohol a couple of years, 20 years ago, of like, I'm not an alcoholic. I just have a drink at lunch and then a drink in the evening. That's not what an alcoholic does. That big term is something that refers to other people. It doesn't refer to you, because when you're going through it, it kind of seems, yeah, realistic. It seems normal. It doesn't seem dramatic.
Did you feel like you had control over it?
Oh, like I that's a really interesting thing, because my initial answer is 100%. But then I think as I kind of went through it, I realized that I didn't. And I think that was when I started to realize I had a problem. And there was a very specific moment when I really realized, oh, this has control over me rather than me having control over it. But up until that point, I remember making bargains with myself of like, look, I will admit I've got a problem, or I will try and talk to someone when I get down to X stone, or when I am doing X calories a day, or when I'm doing X exercises. But I think I knew even then that it was a hollow threat, because when you've got an eating disorder, where do you go? You can't go to the GP, surely. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you ever feel as a man, because I must admit, I never heard of men with
Mm.
anorexia back in the day, back in the 90s, in the early 2000s. Of course, there were men who had anorexia, but I'd never heard of that. It wasn't on TV. You never saw it in the sitcoms. It was always typically shown to be teenage girls. Like that was it. That was the only age range, apparently, where there was. Did you ever feel like you couldn't speak out, or you felt maybe even a little bit of shame as a man that this was in some way, not masculine to admit that you've got, anorexia, or you're struggling?
Well, weirdly, I think the anorexia helped with take away my masculinity. At school, had mates who were sporty. I had mates who were
Mm,
geeky. I had mates who were into football, into rugby. I never had that identity label. And I suppose I always did like artsy stuff, like performing
mm.
arts and Amdram stuff. And I think as I starved my body, I starved my brain, and I became quite camp, and I quite enjoyed that lack of masculinity, that I was quite
Oh,
androgynous. So it was almost something that I kind of celebrated, that I wasn't a blokey bloke. And I think that kind of took that away. It also took away my sex drive as well, which I think like sex and sexuality and losing your virginity was something that was so big and intense. To actually
yeah.
literally starve out your libido felt like, well, I'm actually just taking that off my plate. I'm not actually going to worry about that anymore.
Yeah, I never thought of that. I mean, we've spoken to guests who have admitted that they stopped having periods just due to how much
Mm,
weight that they had lost, and it just.
me
But I've
too.
never quite thought of it that. you had actually starved out your libido, your energy. I mean, sex was like the last thing on your mind. How what was it like focusing on, just trying to get work done? And
Oh,
when you are, yeah, that must be so tough.
I think that's a great question because it really was. And that's the mundanity of an eating disorder. Because I remember I used to hate being at school in the afternoon because I would coffee load in the morning. So I'd have loads of coffee, which gave me loads of energy. And then I would just crash
Oh,
mid-afternoon. And I couldn't really concentrate on anything. I was quite fidgety. And there's also other things surrounded to that as well. And I'm sure it happens with other eating disorders. But for example, your skin becomes really dry. So it was like constantly itching because you don't get any fuel in your body. That's essentially what food is fuel. You're so cold all the time. And it's not like a cold like, oh, it's chilly outside, put on a jumper. You'd put on loads of layers, but because there's no real heat radiating from you, you'd constantly be freezing and wringing your hands. Or be constantly wearing gloves when I was in lessons, and then you'd start getting that pounding headache from the combination of the coffee and the lack of eating. And I could never focus on anything, and I absolutely hated that because I was also constantly fatigued, constantly tired and knackered, and wanting to go and have a nap, which I suppose to a lesser extent is sort of normal for a teenager. But the amount that I was always tired was ridiculous.
was you failing at school in terms of, exams and getting stuff done because you just couldn't focus? Do you feel now that if maybe you had sorted it, you would do better, have done better at school, or?
I did all right with exams. I wasn't top of the class, but I did all right. But I think one of the things that drove the eating disorder was I loved my school, man. Like I genuinely, my mates were incredible, and then I started dating this amazing girl. It was my first ever girlfriend, and the school was ridiculous. It was so fun and funny, and the teachers were brilliant, and we had our own little sixth form room where we could go. And actually, that was a driving force because I knew that all of this had a sell-by date when I was going to go to university. So I was caught between a rock and a hard place of, do I muck about now and go out to the pub? We used to go to the pub, go out, drink, waste time, and have real fun in the moment because I love it now, but to the detriment of my grades and my future? Or do I focus on the future? Do I turn down those opportunities? Do I not spend time with my girlfriend in the hope that I'll get, somewhere in the future, but then I'll look back and regret what I was doing now? And it was that constant tear between, do I focus on the now and make the most of it to the detriment of my future, or vice versa?
It it just sounds like for a teenager, you had so much going on.
Yeah. And
It does.
I really like, but fun stuff. I think this is the thing. Whenever you talk about mental health or people having anorexia, etc., you always think that it's come from some horrible, traumatic event. And I loved my teenage years. I was great. We certainly weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but we certainly, we weren't living in a hovel. And my friends were absolute idiots and stuff. And I just loved that experience so much that was kind of, yeah, it was chaotic. It was full on. And I wanted to kind of wring every second out of every moment. But there was that kind of, tension between whether I focus on studying and try and put my energies there, or if I go out and make the most of the now.
Can I ask, you mentioned how you would drink so much coffee
Mm.
in the morning. Was that kind of your thing? Because when I've sort of starved myself, especially my teenage years, there was always like one liquid that I would have. For me, it was so I did just over 4 days of no eating, like no eating actual food, but I
Wow.
but I used to do milkshakes. So I would do, remember those fridge milkshakes? I would do 3 of
Yes.
those a day. The free fridge. I don't know how I got into it. I don't know where it came from, but in my head, I could have 3 fridge. So one for breakfast, one for lunch, one for dinner, go to bed. And I did that for 4 days, and obviously it was just horrible. I mean, I
Mm.
I remember the next day. like the sort of like after I did 4 days trying to eat food and you just couldn't swallow. I couldn't swallow any food. I remember spitting things out because my body just wasn't used to it, and I had to gradually get myself back into it. And ever since then, I can't drink. I can't go near those milkshakes because it just gives me that feeling. Coffee, I thank the Lord I never got into coffee until I was in my 30s, because I would have done that, because people, you know what people say about coffee, it gives you energy, helps with your bowels as well. There's no calories if you have a plain black coffee. Oh, even saying it now, 14-year-old me would have been all over that completely. Did you ever? I mean, I'm guessing you must have just overdone it with coffee.
I actually did. I did it a ridiculous amount. I remember my PB was I did 12 cups of coffee before midday, and I
Oh my
remember
gosh.
it's not good because I didn't realize it started giving me heart palpitations, because when you're
Yeah.
not feeding yourself, you sort of your beats per minute go down, and then coffee apparently can reduce some people's pulse rate as well, and mine got ridiculously low, so I started feeling fluttery. But then again, one of the things that sustained the eating disorder was there were flashes of when I loved it and enjoyed it, and that's not to glorify it, but there's a reason these people do these things. And when I was feeling manic, when I'd had loads of coffee and I wasn't eating and I felt completely hollow, like I'd eaten nothing for days, it was almost like a spiritual feeling. And I'd just go like, wow, I'd just be like mad on it. It was a really, it was a really intense feeling. But then, exactly like you say, when the binges come, that really balanced it out. Because I think about the amount of binges that I had and I'd forgotten about, which is something people don't tend to talk about that much, is the actual what happened when you binge. And like really public ones as well. And yeah, that's embarrassing.
Mm. How would you? I know how I felt after, because it's that classic. You got to reward you. Like, I would spend all day almost
Mm.
restricting everything. Somebody would say, "Do you want a sweet?" No, no, can't. No sweets for me. Thank you very much. All that, and then at night I would just end up binging, and
Yeah.
I would feel so disappointed in myself and so angry that I've let myself down. And then that would help me spiral. And then each day I'm just getting more and more depressed because I feel like I've let myself down, and I would just go, completely off the rails. I'm assuming you would also go through those similar types of feelings.
Yeah, it was weird for me because I used to almost train for binges. Like someone would train for like a marathon or something. Like for example, I remember we used to have these family friends that would come over, and it was they were kind of like our cousins, and they would come over every sort of 2 months or so. And I always knew that there'd be loads of food around. So I would use that as my inspiration to eat less and less and less each day, because I was like, when they come round, it's going to be party time. And I remember, and it's so embarrassing and so pathetic, that they came over. I think it was Easter one year, and I ate so much and was just gorging myself that I was lying on the kitchen floor. My mum came in and she was like, "What's wrong? Why are you lying down like that?" And I was like, "I honestly can't move." And she was like, "Jesus, what's wrong with you?" And my stomach was kind of like properly
Mm.
distended, like the skin was like tight. She was like, "Jesus, what's going on?" And I was just like, I'd eaten too much. She was like, "What is going?" And it was like, I think it was about 8 o'clock at night, and I was 17, 18, and everyone had to go home because like I was just
Wow.
so uncomfortably full, I couldn't get off the kitchen floor. And I think about things like that now, and I'm like, oh my God, it's mortifying.
Yeah. I've definitely done similar, especially when, you go Christmas or there's a party and you go, oh,
Mm.
I'm gonna try and run a bit more. And then you just and it's no excuse, because sometimes I'll go, I'm gonna work a bit harder at the gym because I'm gonna eat a lot, but I eat way too much. Like, I
Yeah.
go over the top. and I don't feel good. I think there's a level when you can eat as much as you can eat a lot of food and you can enjoy yourself. But then when in your mind, you're like, I don't know the next time I'm going to eat like this. So
Mm.
then you just go over and over the top to the point where I mean, I've been sick because of it. I've been excited and just eaten too much. I can completely see that for you. Um, what I wanted to move on to now is you seeking help. So at the
Mm.
moment you realized you actually needed help, and then how you found it.
I think for me it was quite a long thing. I started to realize I'd got a problem when I worked at this summer job that I had, teaching and looking after these kids. And it was in this really remote location down in Somerset. And up until that point, I was 20 and I'd always been able to prepare my own food or control my own food or hide it or calorie count or whatever. And this place was like 3 miles away from the nearest village. And it was just 3 meals a day, pizza, pasta, chips. And I remember everyone ate together in a communal hall. And I remember binging in front of everyone
Wow.
and it being so mortifying because my class, I remember looking up at me and I got food dripping down my mouth and I just couldn't control myself because I hadn't eaten for so long. And they were like, "What is going on with Mr. Chawner?" And other members of staff were like, "Mate, are you all right?" And to sort of reduce the whole thing down, there was a member of staff who said to me, "Look, I've been in therapy for bulimia 3 times. I find this a really difficult environment. Have you ever thought you might be anorexic?" And that was the first time someone asked me rather than telling me. And I
Mm.
found that incredible, but I still never did anything about it because I never felt anorexic enough. And it took me a further 4 years to go and get help. And by then it was kind of already really sort of quite baked in.
Had had you already started comedy then?
Yes, I had. Up until that point, I never really thought I was properly anorexic, I think. So I'd never
Mm.
really thought about doing anything about that. But I was always so drawn to people doing comedy about like it wasn't even mental health then. It was sort of more depression, more dark stuff, and I was always
Yeah.
really drawn to that. Of what because that's what I loved about comedy. I started watching comedy when I went to university because there was this wonderful little comedy club, and I remember people always talk about university as it was amazing, and there were incredible people and whatever, but it's also well dislocating. I was in this new part of the country that I didn't know
Yeah.
anyone. I'd left all my friends. I was feeling incredibly lonely and I used to go to this comedy club. It was 3 quid. And I just loved the fact that all of the comedians they were idiots. They were losers. They were talking about being broke or driving a terrible car or living with their parents or being terrible with sort of potential partners and not fitting in. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. These are all freaks, but they're celebrating that. And I thought, that's incredible. I want to be a freak.
So you've started comedy. You've still got your own issues with eating. How did you find the sort of late nights? Because a lot of comedians, there's a lot of binging late nights.
Yes.
I've done that as well. There's always that excuse, you know what the excuse is. Well, nowhere's open, so I just have to go and get all of the chips and the kebabs and stuff. How did you find that with your issues still not being resolved?
I think actually weirdly I thought that was kind of it was sort of all right, but it got worse and worse over time because when I did start talking about having anorexia, that
Mm.
made it worse. When I started talking about that on stage, because people came up to me and they didn't mean anything bad by it, but the amount of people that would say, "Oh, you don't look anorexic," or like you've obviously recovered now, or things like that. And I kind of felt like a fraud. And I think that's one of the things about all types of eating disorders is, I suppose it's all relative, but there's always going to be that sinister thing at the back of your mind of like, maybe I don't really have this. Maybe everyone has elements of this, and I'm just not dealing with it as well as other people should. And is there something wrong with me that I'm actually not really anorexic at all? And that really drove it into hyperdrive because people were, starting to, not nastily at all, but basically kind of say, "Oh, you don't look anorexic," or "You don't look skinny," or "It's odd that you say this," and
Mm.
stuff like that, and I found that really challenging.
Did you meet any other comedians who had similar issues?
I met 1 or 2 back then, but it's so interesting that you say about comedians struggling because I remember the first gig I did after lockdown, I was in a green room and there were 4 other acts on. I was emceeing, and 3 out of the 4 came up to me. One said, like, straight out, "I'm really struggling. I have bulimia, and I've just
Wow.
exacerbated so much." The other one turned around and started a really coy conversation of basically saying, "I'm sort of out of control in my relationship to food." And the third one came up to me and said, "Look, I've been living with my family, and I think my brother definitely has some eating issues. Can you give some advice?" And it was just interesting that, yeah, that must have been what, 4 or 5 years ago now, and out of the 4 people on the bill, 3 of them wanted to talk about just eating disorders to me.
Wow. How did you find recovery? Did you go to the doctors? Did you go to like a sort of meetings, like an AA type thing for eating disorders? What really worked for you?
Basically, by the time I realized that I really did have a problem, I knew that it was a slow suicide attempt, and I was very aware that anorexia has the highest mortality of any eating disorder, and I knew what I was doing, and I started taking things to sort of speed it up, and there's horrible ways that anorexia can kill you, and I played the system to stay out of inpatient treatment. But what I didn't see coming was depression. So I went to the doctor for depression rather than an eating disorder. And they referred me on, and I got round the houses. And it was only when there was this really exacerbated nurse who gave me a little bit of tough love and said, "Look, bottom line, you wouldn't expect your laptop to work if you don't charge it. Why do you expect your brain to work when you don't feed it?" And that just was something that I was like, I didn't have an answer to, and I was like, "Yeah, that actually makes sense to me." So I was faced with this, choice of, do I continue on the path that I'm going? And then everyone kind of, let's be honest, like, by the sort of nightmare it was, be relieved when eventually the sort of process took its toll, or do I, sort out the depression and have to sort out the anorexia? And I was then I accepted that I would go into treatment, and I was diagnosed as severely clinically anorexic, and I was under care of the Maudsley Hospital in South London for like 2.5 years. And a lot of that was psychotherapy, a lot of that was a meeting once a week. I tried loads of different things. I did go to meetings, but it
Mm,
was me and 14 other girls, and that just was, yeah, that just didn't really ring true too much to me.
mm. Uh, I'll tell you one thing. You said something there that just like hit me as if somebody punched me. I need you to say, what did you say? A slow suicide
Yeah,
with
slow suicide attempts.
slow suicide. My God, I've often felt like I'm quite a suicidal person, and I think through overeating, it kind of gave me everything that I wanted. Where at times I could feel my heart, I couldn't really walk. My heaviest, I was like way into my over 20 stone, and it just felt like I was slowly killing myself in this way that I I almost I almost couldn't I felt like I couldn't help myself sometimes. Like it just like I just had to do this. I had to overeat. I had to make myself feel really low. And then obviously, like we've spoken about, it's this horrible spiral. And then I got to a point where, because I'm a man, I was like, I can't tell people this. I can't tell people about this. I'll give it a couple of days. I'll stop eating, make sure I feel better, and then I'll go back out into the public. That was basically the way that I would sort of live my life for years. Do you feel now, Dave, that your weight and your body takes up less time in your brain?
I think it definitely does. I think people still get icky around talking about suicide and really uncomfortable. And I think it's something that actually a lot of people, I think it's much more common that people think about it than we'd want to admit. And I think that's still really difficult. I feel like because I had such amazing therapy, I feel like I kind of understand what's underpinning it. That said, after lockdown, I gradually ballooned up and I threw away my weighing scales and I was like, that's fine. And then I remember one day I was like, I don't know, man. I feel like I've, lost control. And I stepped on the weighing scales and it's the heaviest I've ever been. And it just brought back everything. And I was like, this is mad. But gradually over the years, I've gone back. And there are things that I do that people might still say diseased. Like, for example, I still weigh myself once a day. When I do the Edinburgh Fringe, every year I will buy a set of weighing scales and I have to weigh myself every single day. I still know what the calories are and things. I still try and eat to a sort of level. So, but you're absolutely right. It takes up so much less space in my brain to try and free up actually living rather than just existing.
The weighing scale stuff, I've never heard of it at the Edinburgh Fringe. Although when I go to the Edinburgh Fringe, I get very worried about my weight because I'm not eating what I normally eat.
Yep.
Sometimes I might not have my weighing scales to weigh certain food. I do get in my head about it at the Edinburgh Fringe. So I it's so funny that you also do that. You have to have your scales there when you're in. Dave, if there's somebody out there now who might be struggling, let's say there's a guy out there who's listening who might be struggling in a similar way that you maybe did, what kind of advice would you give to them?
So firstly, I would say it's okay to not understand it. The thing that annoys me about whenever we talk about eating disorders is that people must innately, completely, cleanly understand what their issue is, what help they need to get, and how to access that. And actually, if I'd have known why I was doing this, I'd have just stopped it myself. I think it's also okay to think that you kind of enjoy aspects of it as well. That's a really uncomfortable thing for a lot of people to admit. And obviously things like you are not alone. This is so much more common than you would ever think. And there is help out there. There's BEAT, which is the UK's eating disorder charity. I'm patron of a brilliant charity down in the Southwest called SWADA, Southwest Eating Disorder Association. And there's also, for mental health in general, a brilliant app called the Hub of Hope, which basically uses your geolocation on your phone to show you what all of the different mental health resources that are out there. And you can filter through and look just for example, eating disorder services. So there is help, there is support, but I think it's okay to not know what you need in those early stages.
Dave, thank you so much for doing the podcast. Before I let you go, I know you've written a book, White Expectations. Where can the people buy it? Also, tell us about the book and your socials.
You are too kind. Yeah, no, the book, so it's called White Expectations. It's all about how I kind of the beginning, middle, and end, I suppose, of an eating disorder, using this thing called the trans-theoretical model, because people far more intelligent than me have come up with this idea that change doesn't happen in one singular jump. It happens in stages. And they say that there are 6 stages of change. And you can use that for smoking, but you can also use that for eating disorder recovery. So I use that as the basic structure of the book and going, so before I even realized I got a problem, this is how I slipped into an eating disorder. And then when I did realize I got a problem, but I wasn't ready to change, this is how I was. And at each chapter and each stage of the book, it's got like practical tips that you can do to try and lead you on to the next stage of recovery. So that's the kind of ethos of the book, for it's like practical advice, practical tips and things in the moment, and there's not a yoga mat in sight on that book. So you can get that in Waterstones, Foils, Amazon of course as well. And yeah, if you want to follow me, Dave Chawner on Instagram, YouTube and all the sort of regular places.
Dave Chawner, thank you so much for doing the podcast, and congratulations, mate, on getting through those dark times. It's not easy.
Thank you, mate, and ditto.